we use AI on our engineering team to actually build the software that powers the platform. That's sped up our shipping time significantly. Everyone's using Cursor at this point and various other tools as well. We build an AI reply generator where basically you can feed in your account, you can feed in what you want the topic to be for the reply, and it can spit out a reply that can just paste it into the reply. So you don't even need to think about what your reply would necessarily be, but it'll be insightful or funny. At this point, we have a huge data set of high performing replies, and we do see it drive profile clicks. We do see it drive followers. We do see it drive leads, which is really all our clients care about first and foremost is how is it impacting their goals.
Today, we are back for the first episode of the new year of the AI Report Live podcast. Today, we are with Michael Houck. He is a bit of a juggernaut in the industry in general. I've seen his tweets and his LinkedIn a long time ago, and I've been following him for a while. He is the founder of the Megaphone network and the Founding Journey newsletter and podcast. And today I'd really just love to jump into everything that you do, everything you've done, and all the lessons you've learned. So welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Yeah, Liam, good to see you again, man. Thanks for having me on. Excited for this.
Awesome. I mean, we had a bit of a brief discussion beforehand talking about what you do now and what you've done in the past. And something that came up in my research of something that you did do in the past was a thing called Launch House. I was wondering if you kind of give us a brief overview of what that was.
Yeah, so Launch House started as a co-living experiment. This was like peak pandemic. Everyone was cooped up in their apartments. I booked a big house in Tulum, Mexico, and I convinced 20 other founders to come live with me for a month there. There was no plan. It was just, let's all get together and build stuff while we're all so disconnected. Fast forward, it got a lot of attention, both from the content we were putting out and also from the caliber of people we were bringing together into this community. And we ended up raising a Series A for Andreessen Horowitz. And we also raised a venture fund and invested in about 50 companies. We ran these co-living experiments, co-living houses, all across the world. We did them in Beverly Hills. We did them in Manhattan. We did them in Aspen, Lisbon, Miami, and then obviously Tulum. Over the course of about 2.5 years. And it was a crazy journey. We saw a lot of amazing founders come in. I learned a ton from the members of our community. And the investments from the venture fund are still going strong, and the company's kind of folded in and become the venture fund at this point.
From what we discussed beforehand, you were kind of entirely new to that space. So what was the process of becoming accustomed to raising funding from something as reputable as A16Z?
Yeah. So I had no connections to Silicon Valley growing up or through college or anything like that. After college, I was lucky enough to get a job at Uber, helping build Uber Eats pretty early on. We were only in a few cities at the time, and I was still going into parking lots to load burritos into people's cars and then going back to the office to build machine learning models. Very scrappy days. But was able to see that company go through rocket ship growth, and then jumped over to Airbnb, where I was a product manager for Airbnb Plus. And basically started to build my network in SF, where I was living at the time. And we all got laid off on my team at Airbnb during the pandemic. And so I thought about getting another job, but I just wasn't as motivated to do that. I thought, now's the time. The world is changing. Let's start something new. And I didn't know what that was going to be. So I thought, let me just get all these smart people around me and I'll figure it out. And it turns out that getting all the smart people around me was the thing that we ended up raising money for. Fundraising for the first time was very challenging at first, and then it got easier. This was end of the ZERP era, but we tried to raise before we had anything at all. We actually got a term sheet when we were basically pre-everything. We had done 2 of these co-living experiments. We had no recurring revenue. We had a very small community. We got one. The terms weren't great. We turned it down. And then the next year we went out and actually started raising a real round once we had more traction. So that process was very interesting. And we were lucky enough to get some great people on board because they believed in our vision of sort of building a new community, the thought of it maybe becoming a network state or disrupting education for entrepreneurship. And just sort of gathering all these intelligent people in one place was very attractive to investors.
And it seems like to me from an outside perspective that the ending of this journey here, so everything you're doing with Launch House is kind of naturally progressed into what you're doing now with the Founding Journey newsletter and podcast. From what I can see on your LinkedIn profile, it says most people don't know how to build, grow, and raise capital for a startup. So I write a weekly newsletter that shares what I've learned. Tell me about that transition from one project shutting down to another project opening up.
Yeah. So I had started the newsletter right near the end of when we folded Launch House into the venture fund. And it just sort of took on a life of its own. I set it up in the early days of when everyone was moving on to Beehive, and there's a new avant-garde newsletters coming up in all different niches through Beehive, and built relationships with the operators of those newsletters. And we all sort of grew together and shared tips and tricks on how to do that. And yeah, it went from 1,000 subscribers to 25,000 subscribers in just a couple months early on, mostly through me talking about it on my social media channels, and also then through lead magnets and some other things we can get into if that's of interest. Yeah, I mean, the idea is that, I had no network in Silicon Valley. I moved there. I met all these amazing people. I learned all this amazing stuff. These are things that more people should know how to do, but you're never going to learn that through traditional sources. And so what Founding Journey is all about is sort of distilling that knowledge, sharing it with people in an easy to understand way that they can actually take and apply to businesses that they either want to start or are currently already building to grow faster, to raise more capital, and to just build more robust startups.
Awesome. And when you started writing the newsletter, was this around the same time that the podcast was started, or was that a later date?
No, the podcast is only is a relatively new thing. We just launched it a couple months ago in early October. We've had some amazing guests, including Tyler from Beehive. And yeah, we're building our YouTube channel, and it's just youtube.com/call me Houck, which is my handle basically everywhere.
There we are. A nice little plug right in the middle of the episode. Perfect. What I'm super curious about, so you started this newsletter around, a year and a half ago? Would I be right in saying that? A year and a half to 2 years ago?
About 2 years ago. Yeah, about 2 years ago.
So with that's kind of right at the turn of when AI was becoming common knowledge, right? It was really starting to pop off on Twitter, on LinkedIn, stuff like that. Your newsletter, objectively from the outside, is about how people can build, grow, and raise capital for their startups. When did you start noticing a transition to people being more interested in AI content, AI startups, stuff like that? When did you really notice that shift happening?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much right away. I think, ChatGPT launched, I think, end of November in 2 years ago. And I saw it right away that my founder friends, including myself, were all tinkering with every new toy. At first it was just ChatGPT, but then very quickly it became a lot of other things. And I think it was in March of 2023 then, so just a few months after ChatGPT launched, that I started to write in the newsletter about, what are the defensible moats? What are the defensible advantages that founders can have in a world where AI makes products a lot easier to build? And so we covered that. What is the role of a founder in that world versus what is the role of a founder prior to that world? And a lot of other topics. So it's been on my radar for quite some time.
Could you extrapolate on that exact point there, the role of a founder pre-AI and the role of a founder post-AI?
Yeah, sure. So I think post-AI, a founder's role has sort of become more all-encompassing for a longer period of time. When you start a new company, the founder's doing everything, right? They're the marketing department. Maybe they're the engineering team as well, right? They're doing absolutely everything. But very quickly in the past, you sort of needed to, if you want to go really big and build a really big company, you need to raise venture capital so that you can delegate some of those things and do more and grow fast enough. And it just becomes too cumbersome to do it all yourself. What AI has really enabled is giving founders the choice of, hey, maybe I don't need to raise as much right away or as quickly. Maybe I don't need to raise at all. Maybe I can build something that is robust, that is cash flowing millions of dollars a year. And I don't need to hire this big team that's going to require me to get, highly specialized engineers who cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. There's plenty of examples of companies that have done this. The way to think about it is like a Silicon Valley small business. There's a great essay called The Rise of the Silicon Valley Small Business. Maybe we can link to it in the description, that I think really emphasizes this. And I see this shift happening everywhere. I see VCs wondering how the shift is going to impact, how they deploy capital. But I think in terms of the role of the founder is able to take on a wider range of things for a longer period of time than they were able to do pre-AI.
Something I'd suppose with this, and something I've seen online a lot, another person's content I've been consuming a lot of recently is Greg Eisenberg's. And he talks a lot with product managers and different people in the AI space with no technical background at all, that are generating entire applications without AI. I'm wondering, so obviously you've got the podcast and I can see you've been putting out a lot of kind of AI content recently. What are the departments that you're seeing automated most often with these different entrepreneurs that you speak to?
Yeah, I think engineering is a big one, which is interesting. And you can't fully automate engineering yet. Like, let's not be, hyperbolic about that. But the idea that a non-technical founder can build an MVP that is good enough to at least get some initial users through and validate a problem, maybe not find full product market fit, but at least validate that there is something there. That's real. And, Greg, I know, has hosted some good sessions on his podcast about that on YouTube too. With like tools like Bolt and Cursor and things like that. And we've introduced those to our engineering team for my other product, Megaphone. And it's dramatically increased engineering productivity on the team and has actually let us keep the team super, super small. So I would say that engineering is definitely one. I personally I was technical, quote unquote, back out of college. I was a computer science grad. My first job was as an engineer. I've done data science at Uber and Airbnb. But these days, I'm years removed from writing production code. And I've been able to get back in there and actually contribute to our code base in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do without those tools, without like spending a ton of time relearning some things. So I think engineering is definitely one. I think, interestingly, I think a lot of people are trying to do this with marketing, like content in particular. I'm on the fence about that. I think it takes a lot to replicate someone's voice and be really, really unique. And not just have it sound like AI generated content. You watch, you go on Twitter or X, or you go on LinkedIn, and you can sort of tell when content's created by AI. You can sort of tell. And so I think that that's an area where I'm not as convinced that it's automating things yet. But it is logical to think that it'll get across that last mile and be able to do it. So yeah, those are some areas that one that I see and one that I would push back on.
As an operator, knowing what you know now, what are you focusing on developing most skill set wise? I see that because the engineering departments are largely kind of being automated, they obviously need that final human in the loop. And there's lots of other things that can be automated as well. Is it most important to be a good product manager, good at operations? Like, what is the most valuable skill set now that these kind of high value skill sets such as engineering are being automated for the most part?
I honestly think that it's decision making. It's like how you're thinking about problems, which is a crazy thing for me to say because I've always been the execution guy. I'm not the high level strategy idea guy. But I think that in a world where AI is automating more tasks, it becomes way more important that the founder makes the correct decisions on what tasks should be worked on. And to just build leverage for the overall business, you need to make sure that your decisions are tackling the right areas. And so I would say that, the softer skills, communication, and strategy are getting more and more important. And I think that'll continue to be true. Probably also persuasion. In a world where products are really easy to build, it's going to be appealing to a lot of people to build their own products and become entrepreneurs, which I think is really exciting. But if you want to have those people work with you to dramatically accelerate the trajectory of what you're building, you need to be really good at A, working on the right thing in the first place, so decision making, and B, presenting a case in a compelling way to those people to come work with you. So I would say that it's definitely the soft skills. but those ones in particular.
With that being said, obviously you've got the newsletter, you've got the podcast, and you've got Megaphone as well. How has your day been shifted in terms of what demands your attention since this advent of AI and since you started implementing AI? Like, if before your calendar was 40% coding, what does it kind of look like now in terms of, because you talk about this idea of focusing more on strategy, and I'm just wondering how you actually nurture that muscle through what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So I would say that my calendar shifted more towards sales, just naturally, because a lot of our internal processes that I needed to be more, operational, more in the details on, they're either running on autopilot now, or our team is empowered by AI tools to sort of make those trade-offs and decisions on their own. So I've ended up spending a lot more time on sales. We have a ghostwriting agency attached to Megaphone, and we do newsletters, and we do X, and we do LinkedIn. And it's grown pretty quickly. And so a lot of my time is spent growing that either on the sales side or on the account management side, basically more interpersonal time. I would say that's been the biggest shift. I have more time where I just am sitting, thinking strategically. How do I want to allocate our budget? How do I want to allocate my own time? And again, more time for content as well. Getting back into creating that at a high rate of volume.
I mean, it's a really interesting development in the way things are happening. I think people are very afraid of AI because they assume we'll enter this future where everything's just a conversation with a machine and nothing like that. But I actually think it's going to be rather the opposite, and that all the stuff that we don't need to focus on as humans will be done by AI, which will free up more and more time for us to be able to talk to other humans. And I think now more than any other point in history, we're craving human connection, right? Because we're living in this digital world. And I think is that something that you managed to foresee? And that's kind of why Launchhouse started in the first place as well. You were like, right, COVID's hit, like everyone else is by themselves. Everyone's just looking at technology. How do we bring more people together and really focus on human connection? And I'm wondering, as like a side part question to that as well, how important you've found community in terms of like nurturing your business and growing that too.
Yeah, I mean, community was what we were all about. Launchhouse was a community company. And we had these co-living residencies where people would, again, live together in the same house, sometimes in bunk beds in the same room, for a month at a time. And we'd bring them together, for these like, circle, we called them founder circle events, where we'd sit around in a circle, and sometimes it would be professional challenges that we're facing. And other times it would be just, candidly like life challenges, personal challenges. What's been the biggest hindrance to you as a human being, in your life? And that really brought people together, I think, in a way that created a sort of, true bond between them, and also a true affinity for our brand and the community that we built. We had somebody get a Launchhouse tattoo. That's how deeply people really fell in love with what we were doing. And so community has always been super, super important to me. We have a community attached to Founding Journey, as well. We have a few hundred founders in there. And overall, I would say that you're right, that I think AI will be giving us more leverage and more time back to spend it with other people, to meet people, in the professional sense, to network, right? But on a personal level, just building relationships and building bonds with each other. That's what I hope it does. That's sort of the idyllic, positive outlook. Then, the negative one would be that it just puts us into our little Black Mirror pods, and we just click on the TV for what we want for everything. That's the downside. That's the negative case.
Let's hope not. Something I found with the podcast is that I absolutely love doing it, right? Like the podcast is great for two reasons. One, that you can just speak to people and you get access to people that you might not have previously, because people love coming on a podcast, talking about themselves, telling you about their story, telling the world about their story. But the other part of it is that it just lets you focus on more interesting conversations as well. And I'm wondering the reason behind you guys starting the podcast. Was it the idea of this as a good strategic business decision, or is it just, I would like to have more conversations with operators, with founders, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky that I know a ton of founders at this point, and I'm able to have conversations with them, whenever our schedules both allow. So I'm lucky in that way. The podcast is really because I think a lot of those people have interesting journeys to share. And I think with startups in particular, the founder entrepreneur lifestyle and sort of status that goes along with building a company, that gets talked about a lot. You see a lot of that on X. You see a lot of that on other podcasts. But I think one thing that we wanted to do with the Founding Journey podcast was talk about, okay, well, what's the journey to get there, right? And also what happens behind the scenes once you do get there. It's the sort of podcast I think only someone like I could make, because I've seen the highs and extreme lows of building a company. And so when I'm talking to a founder, even though it's a podcast setting and it's going to be public and everything like that, they're willing to share their story, be open with me, because they have a level of trust that, I'm going to deliver that story in a way that's not like a gotcha, not trying to make them look bad, just trying to tell the honest story about what happened. And so that's what the Founding Journey podcast has been about so far. We've had some really good ones come through. Like we had a founder who raised $137 million for a startup called Pitch, and ended up realizing that it wasn't a venture scale business after raising that much money. And he had to, return a lot of the capital. He had to lay off a lot of the team. We also had the founder of Cameo come on, and he talked about his journey from creating a unicorn super quickly to then having growth slow down and having to also do big layoffs, and sort of what they've done since then. Again, these are the types of stories that people are willing to share, specifically because I've seen it all with my startup journey.
Yeah, there's some relatability there, right? Because you know exactly what angle you're coming from. With these different founders, they've raised 10 million, 100 million, 137 million, so on, so on, so on. I'm curious about two things. One, what are the similarities you've noticed in personality traits? And two, what are the similarities you've noticed in storyline that's congruent across all of these kind of different entrepreneurs that you speak to? If that is a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a thing. I would say that the most common element of the story is that it's always dirtier than people think it's going to be. Like when you're building a company, there's always more, I don't know if I can curse on this, but there's always more things getting fucked up. And, it's never as smooth as up and to the right. It's never as smooth as here's our journey to our fundraise in the Twitter thread, right? There's always like pins in the background that are like holding together the good picture. And I think that's just like an honest truth that more people should be willing to talk about, because it does happen to everybody. As far as like traits, sort of in line with that, I would say that resilience is one of the most common things that I see from these founders. Paul Graham talks about how the number one thing that a startup founder needs to be is relentlessly resourceful. And I would say that's something that we see with the founders we talk to. Like when things go wrong, they don't let it deter them. They're relentless, but they're not relentless just objectively. They're relentless and they're really resourceful on how to make the things that they want happen. And so, those are definitely things that we see pretty much across the board.
Is what separates an average entrepreneur from a great entrepreneur that relentlessness? Because I remember listening to, for example, My First Million, and they talk about pretty much anyone they've been involved with in the space that's thugged it out for the space of 10 years has ultimately been successful to some degree, right? Like 90% of people, entrepreneurs that continue that for 10 years or so will become successful. So is it just a case of trying again?
Yeah, I mean, I think reps is a big part of it. I had a small agency business before I joined Uber that I shut down. And then with Launch House was my first venture-backed company. And now I'm building a personal holding company with these different assets underneath it. And I'm able to make the right decisions in way, way less time for these new assets that we've spun up than I would have if I hadn't gone through that experience. So I do think that reps is just part of it. We've grown to well over $1 million in revenue now per year, despite the fact that we're doing a lot of things at the same time, which a lot of people would say, oh, don't build a lot of different things at the same time. when you sort of know what you're doing to some degree, you can do that. You can take more shots on goal, and it's actually more fun too, and it gives you more chances of success. So if one of our things takes off, obviously we'd, maybe put some of the others on autopilot. But so far we've been able to grow them all at a pretty good rate. So I would say reps is part of it, and just powering through the troughs in the journey. But I'd also say that there is just you have to know the right things to learn. I see a lot of founders who've either kept working on the same company for, at this point, years, and it hasn't really grown that much, or they're just so committed to an idea that they get trapped. And instead of actually focusing on the things that are going to make progress, like revenue, listening to customers, instead they're focused on the appearance of being a great founder, like playing founder, so to speak. I see this a lot. These are the people who go to all the conferences and are posting about their journey all the time on maybe Instagram or something like that. And they're getting all these credentials, but the actual startup itself isn't growing in terms of customers. They're not taking a step change in terms of revenue. And I think that as a founder, you really need to know, you need to be willing to walk away, and you need to know, recognize the truth that maybe something isn't working. So I don't think that just doing it for a long time is enough. I think you also need to sort of be ruthless with yourself and understand yourself, understand the situation your company is in, and make those kind of hard decisions.
Yeah, having that humility to be able to tell yourself that the current venture isn't working. And it's funny that you speak about this, because the book I'm reading right now is called Quit by Annie Duke, and it talks about exactly this concept. So something for listeners to hear about. So I can't remember the name of it because I'm halfway through the book, and this example was at the start, but it talks about the idea of this gaming company that started. They'd raised a lot of funding for it. It was only the founder that could see that this eventually wasn't going to last, right? So they started this gaming company. They were seeing growth. They were seeing an increase in growth. They were getting more funding, but the founder was like, no, this isn't going to work long term. So he ended up quitting that, but he used the internal messaging app from that and spun it out into its own startup. Can you guess what that startup is?
Is that Slack?
Slack, indeed. Exactly. So it's like, yes, knowing when to quit as well as having that resilience is a massively important thing.
I worked on Launch House every day for 10, 12, 16 hours a day for over 2 years. And then it became very clear that the company was not going to become everything we thought that it could be. And so you just had to be willing to accept that, acknowledge that, and walk away from it. So it's a tough decision, but as a founder, you're better serving society if you're adding maximum value to it as like the entrepreneurs are the engines of economic growth, of prosperity, of all those things. That's a responsibility. And you need to let your ego kind of go away and instead focus on how can I add the most value, and understanding when that means moving on.
I love it. I think that's sage advice. I'm conscious of time, so I want to use this last 15 minutes that we have together to really talk about Megaphone, how AI has changed your company, and what your predictions are for the future. So I want to start off with your tagline. So your tagline for Megaphone is "Go viral on demand." Tell me a little bit more about how you came up with that and what exactly Megaphone does.
Yeah, we tested some pretty bad ones early on. I don't even remember what they were because it was over a year ago. But Go Viral on Demand is the one that performed the best. Basically what Megaphone is it's a network of creators who want to partner with either startups and brands or individuals in order to grow their audience and get their message out there. So, these are creators with, I think we have hundreds, if not low thousands of creators at this point who have millions and tens of millions of followers in aggregate on X and LinkedIn. And basically you can partner with them on content. So you can send your content to them and they'll help amplify it to their audience, or you can partner with them on having them create content for their audience as well about your brand or startup or whatever it is. And so we've seen that help people go from literally like under 100 followers on X to 24,000 followers in 3 months. We've seen people go from 1 to 2,000 followers to a similar range in even shorter period of time. Yeah, and granted, if you're sending your own content to them, that content itself needs to be really high quality. And so that's why we started a ghostwriting agency as well. It's myself and Blake Emal, who has an even bigger audience than I do, who lead a team of writers who, we've worked with in various capacities for a long time. And they'll create the content for you. We'll put it into the network and we'll get those creators to boost it up and amplify it. So it's just a way to build your influence and grow your audience, faster than you would be able to just organically, for a pretty low cost.
What I want to know is how exactly you're using AI internally. Because I mean, you mentioned a team of writers there, right? And something that people quite often automate is the writing process. If you can feed it on enough data in someone's voice, you can ideally replicate that. So tell me about how you're using AI internally.
Yeah. So we use AI on our engineering team, as I mentioned, to actually build the software that powers the platform. That's sped up our shipping time significantly. Everyone's using Cursor at this point and various other tools as well. On the writing side, we actually still use human writers to do everything. I write my own newsletter with no AI assistance. We have our writing team who writes content for our clients, also with no AI assistance. That's maybe a little contrarian, but I think the human touch still does help, especially for clients who maybe don't have a huge backlog of content that we can feed into some AI and train it on the voice. So that's been helpful. But one thing we did do is we built an AI reply generator. So let's say you want to get impressions on X or LinkedIn by leaving comments on content from thought leaders in your niche. And those comments should be either insightful or funny or something like that. But they don't necessarily need to have your unique voice quite as much as like content that you're posting to your own feed. We built an AI reply generator where basically you can feed in your account, you can feed in what you want the topic to be for the post or for the reply, and feed in the URL of the post you're replying to, and it can spit out a reply that can just go. You can just paste it into the reply, so you don't even need to think about what your reply would necessarily be, but it'll be insightful or funny. And those tend to do pretty well. We have a team of ops folks who help execute those. And get them on posts that are doing well.
Interesting. How do you get that to stand out? Because I feel as if looking at LinkedIn, it's pretty easy to sense what replies are AI generated. So is there anything you've done differently to make that stand out a little bit? And ultimately, a second question on top of that as well is like, what do you kind of foresee that our ecosystem looking like in 2 or 3 years' time, right? Because I think most people that are working at economies of scale are using tools like this. So are we just going to have a bunch of AIs creating content and then replying to content, replying to the replies? Like where do we end up with this?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought experiment. As far as what we do, I would say that, at this point we have a huge data set of high performing replies that we've trained a model on. And so it doesn't come off just like, great job, or like some like AI.
Amazing insights, Liam. Wow.
Right. Yeah. You're not going to get that. You're going to get that. And what we see is, we do see performance, and we do see it drive profile clicks. We do see it drive followers. We do see it drive leads, which is really all our clients care about first and foremost is how is it impacting their goals of either building their audience or growing their business. So I don't worry as much about that because we see the results. But as far as where it could go, yeah, I mean, I did see, I did see some worry about this when there was a tool that I think went viral on X a couple times, that was basically doing this via a Chrome extension where you could press a button right on the content and the reply would pop up. And I think that kind of drew some flags. What we're doing that I think stays on the right side of that line is we have that human step before we just paste it into the reply. You're not just hitting a button and it shows up on the content. You actually have a human in the loop who sort of has the ability to edit it and things like that. So It's a little more high touch. But as far as where it goes, yeah, I don't know. We could definitely see a world where social networks are majority bots. There's already this thing called I think it's called the dead internet theory. I could be getting the name wrong, but it says that, 60% or more of the internet is actually already bots, and we don't know. And we're just talking into an echo chamber. There's a guy on X as well. I forget who it was. He created a social network where you sign up for it and you are the only human in your instance of the social network. So you're just talking to bots and another user is just talking to bots, and there's no way for you guys to sort of interact. I don't know how big something like that could get, but it's very interesting to see, like, how do people behave in that sort of situation.
Yeah, and I feel as if that's a conversation for another time when we've got an hour and a half, because I could talk about this forever as well. I want to wrap up the podcast with two things. Firstly, I'd love to know how all the different moving parts of what you're focusing on, the newsletter, the podcast, the business, how they all fit together and what you're kind of looking at for 2025 and beyond. What's the plan? All right. And then the second part of that question is, based on kind of what your plan is, what's some advice from maybe some entrepreneurs or some founders that are starting or have started their business in the AI sphere moving forward? So
for my business, it's a personal holding company. So founding journey, I think we expect to just really grow the newsletter base. We're at about 70,000 subscribers right now. I think we can get to 200K this year. That's my goal. And then for, maintaining our open rates and our click rates and all that stuff. For Megaphone, we're launching a new groups feature that I think could really open a Pandora's box of what the platform could become. Basically, creating little groups for you and your friends to share your posts back and forth rather than copy pasting it to different people in different places. Just share it once through us, and also public groups where you can join people in your niche and sort of amplify each other and build content partnerships with them. So there's a lot that we can do with Megaphone there. But the ghostwriting agency is probably the biggest part right now. That's been growing really quickly. And so that's a focus. And then we actually have just launched something where we can grow newsletters extremely quickly with cold email, basically. And there's some mechanics behind that of how we do that at scale. But we can add, thousands of high quality subscribers to people's newsletters in an extremely short period of time for rates that are better than they can get with paid ads, even though the subscribers are, similar quality. So that's something we're really excited about, and we think could go pretty big this year. But we'll see. By the end of Q1, we'll know for sure whether that's going to be a huge business or just another part of the company. So that's on my side. As far as like my advice to founders who either are new, have just started a company or thinking about starting a company in the AI space, I would say that we saw the same thing. I hesitate to draw the parallel to crypto, but we saw the same thing with crypto a few years ago that we're seeing with AI in the last few months and over the last year, which is that when things work and when things are going really well, it's really easy to get haters for those things. Really easy for people to knock it and say, oh, here's why it won't scale, or here's why it won't work. But that's happened with every platform shift, every major technological shift through history. It happened with mobile, right? People said the iPhone was going to fail. The App Store would never birth, all the companies that it has. AI is a transformational technology, and I think that we should encourage the founders more to sort of power through that. If someone calls your app a ChatGPT wrapper, find a reason why it's not. Find a path forward that's more robust and sustainable, and going to help the company last for a long time. You need that resilience. You need that relentlessness. You need that drive in order to do that. No one's going to do it but you. So my advice would be power through, ignore what people say. Listen to what they say, and ignore the parts that don't help you on your journey. Basically, take the information and ignore the hate. So yeah, that would be my number one piece of advice to AI founders going into 2025.
Awesome, Michael. I want to thank you very much for your time and just for all of your advice and all of your insights here today. I'd love to run this back when we've both got more than 45 minutes because this could be a 3-hour conversation easily. So maybe we'll run this some point in the future, but thank you so much for today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Liam, let's do it, man. I'm here. Thanks for having me on. This was great. If anyone wants to check us out, megaphone.network and foundingjourney.com, or I'm on LinkedIn, just Michael Houck.
There we are. I'll leave all the links down below. Thank you.